Alright, so here's question number 4, which is a question from coplanar forces, where you have a point and from that point you have multiple forces acting, and maybe they're in equilibrium, maybe there's a resultant which we have to find. So we'll find out after reading the question. Let's see what it says. The figure shows two horizontal forces P and Q acting on a particle. Alright. The angle between the direction of P and the direction of Q is 150 degrees. The force P has magnitude x newtons. The force Q has magnitude 5 under root 3 newtons. Alright. And the resultant of P and Q has magnitude under root 129. Find the value of x, the angle between Q and the resultant, giving an answer to the nearest degree. Okay, so let's start with the first part. And these two parts combined, by the way, make 8 marks. So that means there's definitely a significant amount of working that's involved. So what we're going to do is the method that we use whenever we have two forces acting away from a point is the parallelogram rule. Okay, and the rule is that we make a parallelogram with the help of these two forces by considering the two forces that were given to be two sides of the parallelogram. Okay, so since we have to complete the parallelogram, that means the same length that we have here needs to be drawn over here, and the same length that we have here needs to be drawn on the opposite side of it. Okay, so we now have ourselves a parallelogram. Okay, and then the resultant, where do we place the resultant? The resultant is always the diagonal. Okay, now let's understand this for a minute. That means if from this point you have two forces acting in the directions shown, the resultant force will be acting in this direction. And what's the resultant? The resultant is equals to under root 129. Now a good idea at this point would be, and by the way, whatever, since it's a parallelogram, that means this would be equal to x, since it's opposite of x, and this would be equal to 5 under root 3. Okay, now we have drawn the parallelogram, but the question is, how will this help us in finding the value of x? Now before we do that, just note that this angle will be equal to 30 degrees. And what's the reason behind that? Well, multiple reasons. Number one, it's a parallelogram, so we know that opposite angles in a parallelogram are equal and adjacent angles are supplementary. So the first thing we need to do is we need to single out the triangle that we're going to use. So let's draw this triangle separately, which will give us a better perspective. So let's take this triangle, let's drag it here, and now we have ourselves an angle which is 30 degrees. The length opposite to this angle is equal to under root 129 as given in the question, and this is 5 under root 3, and this is equal to x as given in the question. Now what can we use here? Well, if you think about it, we don't have three sides, we have two sides, and thankfully we have the angle opposite to this side. Okay, so that means we can use cos rule over here. Okay, we can use cos rule over here. How? Here's how. So square root of 129 squared is equal to, will be equal to 5 under root 3 squared plus x squared minus 2 into 5 under root 3 into x into cos 30. Okay, so imagine that you had to figure out this side. So what you do is this square is equal, a square is equals to b square plus c square minus 2b into c cos a, where a is the angle opposite to the side that you have right before the equals to sign. So let's work this out. This is equal to 129, 5 under root 3, the whole thing squared would be 25 times 3, which is equal to 75 plus x squared. So we're heading towards a quadratic equation. Minus, now let's work this out, 2 into 5 under root 3 into cos 30. Let's see what's that equal to. That's equal to 15. So minus 15x. Okay, let's write it like a quadratic equation. So we have x squared minus 15x, and what is 75 minus 129? That's equal to negative 54 equals to 0. So we have ourselves a quadratic equation which I believe can be solved with the help of middle term breaking. So factors of 54 that leave us with 15. 2 times 27 not going to work. 3 times 18, that can definitely work. So we can have x squared minus 18x plus 3x minus 54. Make sure you take care of the sign. So we have x into x minus 18 plus 3 into x minus 18 equals to 0. So that means x plus 3 into x minus 18 equals to 0, which means one value of x is equals to minus 3, which obviously is not possible. the other value of x is equals to 18, which obviously is the value that makes the most sense. So that means the correct answer of part 1 is x equals to 18, and there you go, that's the answer. All right, now let's have a look at part 2. Part 2 says the angle between Q and the resultant. Okay, so remember these two forces were basically P and Q. Okay, so force P was x newtons, which we have worked out to be equal to 5. Actually, no, we didn't work out to be 500. No, actually, we did work out. That's equal to 18, and force Q was 500√3. So we are supposed to now find out the resultant. No, we're supposed to find out the angle between Q and the resultant, giving an answer to the nearest degree. So Q was 500√3. So Q was basically which force? Q was basically this force right here. Okay, and this is the resultant force. So we are supposed to find out the angle. This is the angle that we're actually supposed to find out. Okay, this is the angle that we're now supposed to find out, which will give us, which will basically help us figure out what we. Okay, I just realized that in the previous part I swapped the values. So this is where x was supposed to be, and this is where 503 was supposed to be. But anyway, thankfully it didn't change our answer, but yeah, this is the correct way to put it. Now let's do part 2 over here. So part 2, the angle that we're supposed to find is basically the angle between 500√3 and the resultant, which is under root 129. Okay, this is the angle that we're supposed to find. We can clearly see that this is an obtuse angle, and now that we have 18, let's place it here. Okay, so what can we use here? If you think about it, we have all three sides. We can actually use sine rule also. Yeah, you know what, let's use sine rule. So if I use sine rule, let's call this theta. So sine theta upon 18 will be equal to sine 30 upon under root 129. Okay, so this is the angle. Remember, this was the force Q, and this is the resultant force right here. So this is the angle that we're supposed to find, which is going to be an obtuse angle. So let's work this out. Sine 30 divided by under root 129. You can also use cosine rule, in case you're wondering, in case you thought of cosine rule initially, that's perfectly all right. So we get sine theta to be equal to 0.792 something. We're going to take sine inverse of the answer, which gives us 52.4109, which obviously doesn't make sense because theta cannot be an acute angle, theta is obtuse angle. So theta is equals to 180 minus answer. In case you're wondering how I know it's an obtuse angle, well, remember, here you can see that when we make a parallelogram, we already have one angle which is 30 degrees. This is another acute angle. Okay, so that means this angle has to be, and we can clearly see that it's going to be an obtuse angle. Okay, so theta will be equal to, the true value of theta will be equal to 180 minus the answer that we have gotten, which means 180 minus 52.4109, which is equal to 127.589. And I think the question is asking us to give the answer correct to the nearest degree. Yes, it does. So the correct answer would be 128 degrees, and that's the answer to part 2, and also the end of question number 4.